I'll tell you a little about what I'm going to talk about while we're working on that. Um, I, from time to time, go out of state to talk about my books, and I might go to Albuquerque or St. Louis or Oklahoma City, and always afterwards there's somebody who walks up to me and begins talking, but somewhere or another they say, we just think you Texas people um, look down on everybody. And that makes me feel bad. I have to tell them, no, those of us from Texas don't look down on everybody. We just don't look up to anybody. If they don't say that, they'll say to me, my point is that we're not universally liked. Uh, I got an email just recently from someone, a friend, who I, they'll tell me, you Texas people, you got no regard for the truth about things. And again, I have to tell them we have great regard for the truth, which is why we use it so seldom. And but my point is, we have a reputation. All of you have a reputation as Texans. Go anywhere you want, and the cab driver or the Uber driver will ask you to tell a Texas story, or he'll have a Texas story. Um, but the fact is, we live in a state that's so exceptional, so different, that anything we say sounds like exaggeration or a lie, really. Um, Now we know Texas. Texas is a big state. It takes up most of the North American continent, with a little bit of room left over for the other states, Canada and Mexico. We're the only state that's bordered north and south by two major rivers, both of which are navigable by pedestrians. And we and when people want to talk to us about Texas, it's always about three things. It's about Texas size, it's about Texas weather, and it's about the Texas legislature. Well, I'm not going to mention much about the legislature now, but in terms of Texas size, the settlers, even from the beginning, knew how large it was, 800 miles east to west. The settlers came in, a wagon full of settlers came into Texarkana. A couple particularly just had a little baby boy. By the time that wagon made it to El Paso, that boy was rolling his own cigarettes. It's a long trip, you know. Uh, the the weather. We got all sorts of types of weather that we deal with. We've got drought, no rain for. In fact, you ask somebody in Central Texas, have you had any rain lately? He said, well, you remember in the Bible where it talks about raining 40 days, 40 nights? Yeah. Well, we got about 2.5 inches out of that one. So, not mu- I mean, and hot and dry. There are places in East Texas where they're having to feed the chickens ice cubes to keep them from laying hard-boiled eggs. It's a it's um, it's a lot. We are a people who are loud, proud, and brash, and we take pleasure in it, really, don't we? Uh, Now, it hadn't always been that way. This young man in 1927 was accepted to Amherst College up east. Big thing for a Dallas boy at the time to be accepted to a big Eastern school. His family had a little money. His dad took him out shopping, suits, got nice suits, shirts, ties, everything that a student at a nice Eastern college would wear. He got there, and the first thing people asked him was, "You ride in a wagon to go to school? Have you seen any wild Indians? Are they around? Is that a problem for you? And do you have any cattle on your place?" He had grown up on Ross Avenue in Dallas, and none of that was so, and he had to tell them, and they hardly believed him. Uh, he wrote to his parents, as a matter of fact, to say that when he came knowing about Texas, much the same state of ignorance characterized most Americans in the decade of the 20th century, and it was so. Um, People looked at Texas and their people out of state, the only thought they had of Texas at the time was it's nothing but cactus, cowboys, and cattle. That's about all Texas is. But by 1950, that's just 20 something years later, it was different. There were national magazines, Saturday Evening Post, Life magazine, others doing multi-page spreads on Texas sports teams, Texas fashion, Texas millionaires, oil millionaires, uh, and particularly about the people that brag about Texas and annoying. But uh, what happened in those 30 years, actually those 25 years or so? That's what led me to ask how we got that impression, how people got that impression of us being so loud, proud, and brash in just a short time. Uh, that's pretty much us, big-headed, braggy, self-glorifying. You can read them all. But how did it come about? That's what led me to write Texas Loud, Proud, and Brash. I identified 10 people between roughly 1927 and 1950 whose actions, words, or achievements uh, got the national attention and brought attention to Texans in a way that, in many different ways, as you'll see. Now, I'm not going to be able to tell you about all 10 of them tonight. I'd like to, but I'd be talking a lot faster than I'm talking now. But I will go through some of them, and you're welcome to ask questions later about the others or read about them. And some of them, some of the names you know, some of them you've never heard of. And I'm going to start with one that you don't know at all, probably. Has anybody here heard of Boyce House? Anybody? Okay, one person. Boyce House, two. Boyce House is a person that he came to Texas at 20 years old in 1920 and became the editor of the Oil Belt Daily News in Eastland. It was just the time, everybody know where Eastland is? About 100 miles east or west of Fort Worth. Came to Eastland about the time it became an oil boomtown, the first big non-Gulf oil find in the state, and the biggest one to date in the state. The beginning of the discovery, right on the edge of what we now know as the Permian Basin, just awash with oil. In fact, he said that sometimes the oil was so close to the ground, close to the surface, that men with peg legs had to stay out. They couldn't. It was at any rate. Boyce House became an author. He became a columnist. He ran for statewide office twice. But what he's really remembered for is in 1928, the county, Eastland County, was in need of a bigger courthouse. There was a lot of oil manipulation going on, stocks being sold, land registered. They needed a bigger courthouse and decided to tear down the old one that was 31 years old, build a new one. Well, Boyce was hanging around some old courthouse bench guys, and one of them said to the other, I wonder if that old horn frog's still alive in there. Well, what horn frog? He asked the reporter in him. Says, Well, 31 years ago when they built that courthouse, we came for the ceremony to lay the cornerstone, and my son had a horn frog in his pocket, just a pet horn frog, and he dropped it in that cornerstone right before they sealed it. And it's said that they can hibernate for up to 100 years. So I wonder if that horn frog's still alive. Boy's House thought this was a great story. So he began putting it out on the newswire and wrote the story of, does the frog live? Well, people went nuts wondering, what is a horn frog? What is it from Texas? Texas really has frogs with horns that spit blood out of their eyes. What is this? That's a crazy place. So by the time they were tearing down the courthouse and getting to where the cornerstone was, there were 2,000 people gathered in the town waiting to open up that cornerstone. There were reporters from all over the country, wire service folks, and they had a big platform built in front of it. There were three guys. There was a real estate guy, there was a minister, there was a mayor, I think, or a city councilman. And the workmen brought the sealed cornerstone up to that platform and began prying the top off. The real estate guy looks into it and kind of reaches down and sees something, starts to pick it up, and it's just a dry husk of a horn frog, not much. And the crowd does exactly that. Oh, they're disappointed. He hands it over to the preacher. At about that time, the back leg of it starts jiggling, and it takes a deep breath and blows itself up. The minister says he lives and hands it off to the other. Well, the crowd just goes wild. They began coming in to see the horned frog. From that point on, they put it into a big goldfish bowl and put it in the window of the pharmacy. People would go by and stare at that thing 24 hours a day. Word went out nationally about the frog. They named it Old Rip after Rip Van Winkle. But Old Rip became famous around the country for being the resurrected horn frog. He was alive, and people would pull off the highway to come see him and stay overnight in Eastland, be sure to see him. There was eventually, over time, there were products named after him. They named a cigarette after Old Rip, breathed deeply, and a coffee. The coffee was Old Rip coffee, wake up. And there was an Old Rip chocolate bar that was made in Abilene. People were asking to have horned frogs sent to them. There was a plant in Chicago that had them, that they ordered up from kids. Send them, I'll pay $5 each. Send them to a plant in Chicago, and they bronzed them like baby shoes. I mean, I know, I don't even want to know the process on that one, but you'll see one of those come up every once in a while on eBay. But Old Rip actually went on tour. Old Rip with Boyce House, the newspaper man, in tow, went with a delegation to Washington to be presented to the senator at the time. And the senator looked at Old Rip and was pretty pleased about that constituent. He said, y'all wait here for a minute. He picks up the phone, makes a quick call, and says, you go down the front stairs, there's gonna be a black car pick you up in just a minute. So they take Old Rip and his fishbowl down the front stairs. Sure enough, black car comes along, drives them to the White House. Calvin Coolidge has agreed to see Old Rip. So they take him up to the Oval Office or wherever the president was. President, silent Cal, doesn't say a word, looks at it, kind of pokes it with his glasses to be sure it's alive, then says, extraordinary. The horned frog said nothing. But Old Rip, Old Rip ended up, unfortunately, they left the bowl out on a back porch one warm March day, but a typical Texas Northerner came through that night, and he was decidedly dead the next morning. There was no bringing back on from that. His obituary appeared in newspapers around the country. The New York Times had his obituary. A local funeral home offered to embalm and preserve him, which they did. A local company built a little wooden casket that was velvet lined and with glass on the side. So if today you should drive to Eastland and go into the new courthouse, the one that was built in 19 whenever, go into that new courthouse, you can see the embalmed body of old Rip right there in the courthouse today. It's worth a trip. Oh, one other thing about Boyce House. He wrote a number of books about boomtowns and oil, and he was, wrong way. He was later invited to Hollywood to become the technical advisor and dialogue advisor for the movie Boomtown with Spencer Tracy, Clark Gable, and others. Said to be the most realistic oil picture that was ever made. And when you hear him say, when you hear Clark Gable say, "I'm not going to get my Justin boots dirty in that mud," or any of the other Texasisms that they use, that comes directly from Boyce House. I've read the studio papers that he left there. Oh, here are two guys that should not be together. I can't believe there's a picture of them there. Amon Carter was publisher of the Fort Worth Star Telegram. Fort Worth Star Telegram at the time, 1936, was the largest circulation newspaper in Texas. And Boyce House had pretty well staked out the territory to the west as his circulation area. And he was pretty proud of that. He wasn't going to let any folks from the east move in on that circulation. In fact, Fort Worth was the largest town to the west until you got to Los Angeles at the time. But he was in direct competition with Dallas. And in fact, he branded himself Fort Worth, where the west begins, Dallas, where the east peters out. And so there was a rivalry there. It said that he would not even buy a meal in Dallas. If he went over there for a meeting, he'd pack his own lunch. Well, R.L. Thornton, who was a banker and a civic leader, later to become mayor, it's kind of the same way about Fort Worth. He had on a sign on his wall that said, Fort Worth passports issued here. A guy from Ford, a representative from Ford, who was looking to put a plant into Dallas or Fort Worth, had met with both cities, but he was in Thornton's office. He said, "Okay, you told me about Dallas, but tell me just one good thing about Fort Worth. Tell me one." "Sure," Thornton says. "One of the best things about Fort Worth is that they got a train leaving every 30 minutes coming east to Dallas." Just said, well, it was 1930, it was coming up on 1936. It was the birthday of Texas independence, 100th anniversary. And the state legislature decided that, there ought to be a celebration of some sort. And they had finally decided there ought to be a single lead city rather than little ones all over the state, but one big one. So they sent out bid packages to the four largest cities in the state, which was San Antonio, Houston, Fort Worth, and Dallas. But everybody knew that was just paperwork. San Antonio or Houston were going to get it. San Antonio had the Alamo, Houston named after Sam, and it was close to the San Jacinto battlegrounds. So the Fort Worth people they didn't even bother to respond to it. The bids went back into the legislative committee, who made a tour around to the different cities to listen to their proposals. San Antonio and Houston were a bit snooty about it. You really know that you will probably choose one of us, so just flip a coin. We'd rather have you here, but flip a coin, but they were asked, "Are you going to contribute to the cost of it?" Well, no. In that case, it'd be our celebration, not the state celebration. We expect the state to fund it pretty well. They get to Dallas, and there is R.L. Thornton waiting for the train, and he's got with him architects, marketing people, and others. They hold meetings for the legislative folks, take them on a tour of the Fair Park area, tell them we've had experience for 40 years running a large exposition here on these grounds. Here are buildings that we will build and will fund, and we'll put up $9 million we've pledged $9 million to start the state centennial celebration here. And the legislative committee is just, they hardly have any questions. They're just gobsmacked by the enthusiasm and the depth of the presentation. One of them does ask Thornton as they're leaving, "Well, Mr. Thornton, are you going to have some sort of entranceway or esplanade to welcome folks in?" Well, absolutely. We're going to have the biggest damn esplanade you've ever seen, welcoming people in, coming down into these fairgrounds. And as they walk on, Thornton kind of turns to his architect and goes, "What the hell is an esplanade?" But, true story. Well, Dallas, it took 15 minutes once the group got back to Austin of discussion to do it, and Dallas won the centennial. They beat them out. The news came out, and there was reporters sitting near Amon Carter, and when he got the call from Austin saying that Dallas was getting it, the reporter said that Amon Carter broke his own record for consecutive goddamn, just one after another. But he said, "I'm not going to let Dallas beat us. We're going to work. We're going to have our own centennial celebration." So he hired a Broadway producer by the name of Billy Rose, and Billy Rose began to develop it into something a little bit different from Dallas's. Now, the Dallas Centennial was a beautiful affair. I don't know how many of you have read about it or walked those grounds there. They're just remarkable. Those Art Deco buildings that are still there from the Centennial, the layout of it, the dadgum esplanade lit at night is beautiful. It's just really, and especially that it's still there. So very staid, very educational type place. It was going to be talking about the future. It wasn't going to be talking about the past. But Fort Worth was where the West begins, and he and Billy Rose, the promoter, who you may know if you've seen Funny Lady, was married to Fanny Bryce at the time. But he got Billy Rose from Broadway. They had gaudy attractions going on. There were contests for most beautiful girl. There was a bar that it was called at the time the longest bar in Texas, where you could buy alcohol and drink. There were at that bar, there were 5 ladies called the Bubble Sisters. They all weighed in excess of 350 pounds, standing on the bar, singing and dancing. It was something to see. And if you turn down the right corner, you'd end up, and men somehow knew how to do this, get to Sally Rand's nude ranch. There were girls working Sally Rand's nude ranch. The theme that they came up with was this Fort Worth started promoting it as go to Dallas for education, come to Fort Worth for fun. And it worked that way. In fact, just to gig Dallas a little bit, Amon Carter had installed an illuminated sign on that row of buildings in front of the entrance to Fair Park, a big illuminated billboard that said "Fun and Whoopee," 45 miles or 45 minutes west. Again, look at how staid and nice the Dallas one was. Here's a little example of Fort Worth. That's their program, Wild and Whoopee, the entertainment over there. And that sign, anybody who exited the Dallas exposition saw us there. Together, they brought in more than 7 million new people to Texas. Neither one of them made money, but it brought 7,000 people who had never been to Texas before. I'm sorry, 7 million people, out-of-staters who had never been to Texas before, to see it for the first time, to realize it was certainly not just cactus, cowboys, and cattle, that it was a burgeoning area. Let's see, who's next? Oh, it's a woman you've never heard of, unless you recognize the last name. Last name, of course, is Justin, from Justin Boots, and she was a daughter of H.R. Justin, who manufactured boots in Nocona. She was the oldest daughter. There were 3 sons, and Enid, though, was the one who during school and as a little girl just loved to be at her daddy's plant, watching custom boots being made. She would do patterns on the sides. She did daddy's paperwork, and she was daddy's girl. The boys ended up coming into the business as they grew up and got older, and it kind of hurt Enid's feelings when Daddy named the business H.R. Justin and Sons. He changed the name to H.R. Justin and Sons. Kind of hurt her feelings. But it was especially hurtful when, after Daddy died and the sons took over, they ran it well, no question. They were good managers. And one of the things they had to decide was, we're in the middle of the Depression. We need better access to capital, we need better access to labor, and we need better transportation than we can get here in Nocona. We're going to move the plant to Fort Worth. Enid hit the roof. Daddy would not have let you do that. You shouldn't do it. That was against everything he wanted. He wanted everything to stay here in Nocona. I said, I'm sorry, Enid, but this was given to us. We have the controlling interest in the stock, and we're going to move to first. It was a family split that stayed that way forever. But Enid said, okay, I'll show the brothers. She gathered up all the equipment that they let stay in Nocona and the employees that had been let off. And she founded the Nocona Boot Company. And for the rest of her life, almost the rest of her life, competed with her brothers, with the Justin Boot Company in Fort Worth. Now, like any other company, they were affected by sales during the Depression. And she noticed particularly that sales in the Western states weren't what they could be. She wanted greater, we'd say today, market penetration in the Western states. So she devised, along with a promoter in Nocona as well, she devised and sponsored an event that was the world's longest horse race. It was a 2,000-mile race from open country race by horseback from Nocona, Texas, to the entrance of the San Francisco Golden Gate Exposition. Whoever makes it first is going to get a hat full of 750 silver dollars just minted at the San Francisco Mint. So line up, boys, and let's go. Now this is her, At the starting line of that race, it was March 1st, 1939. The starting line of that race, ready to go. There were newspaper people there. There was a big crowd, and you can see that these are the guys that after said to go, headed off. There were 16 entrants to it. The rules were they could take 2 horses only, and they would have to alternate horses. So that meant they had to rest a certain amount of time. They'd alternate horses. It was a cross-country race. And as they went they left Nakona, down over to Wichita Falls, down to Abilene, out across the Chihuahuan Desert to El Paso, and the newspapers began doing stories about them. These guys, these guys racing, the 15 of them all had names. They could put names to them, and as one got ahead, they'd give the daily results. The newspapers did. Even more as they got further into New Mexico and crossed New Mexico into Phoenix. By the time they get to, or into Arizona, by the time they get to Phoenix, there is the governor waiting out. I take it back. There's the mayor of Phoenix waiting for them to decorate them and have a press event as they come through. But the newspapers, again, front page of who's leading, who's ahead, and Sonny's horse came up lame, and they've got to rest him for a day or two, and what about him? And so everybody's following there. They follow through the Inland Valley of California. People began to, fire departments began to race fire trucks out to where they were, sirens going off, people gathering, cowboys from different ranches riding along with them. It came down to one guy from Matador, Texas, who came in first, and he won the race. Miss Justin got a lot of publicity from it, and what she got also was maybe what she was angling for. She got an invitation to Hollywood, and that is, won't you come down and tour the studios with your winner? They were looking for publicity at the studios, and she was looking to meet the Wranglers, those guys out in the back lots that were played the rustlers, the no-name rustlers in the Western movies, or the guys that wrangled the stock for the studios and stuff, and showed them her boots. Here's the boot, and we've got a particular type of heel that's going to help you get out of that saddle quickly if you fall off, and she began to show that off. The winner, by the way, who toured with her, got a contract. He appeared in 3 movies at the time, not as anybody named, Man with Mask or Ratchan Ranchan number 3, didn't do real well, and ended up going to the Navy pretty quick. But yeah, but here's Miss Enid. Here's Miss Enid with Ken Maynard, who was a TV star. And if you look, you really can't see him in this photograph, but if you look on some of the old Western movies, and you look closely at the heel of some of the boots that the rustlers or the others are wearing, you'll see it's a particular Nakona Boot Company heel that she made those sales. She opened up accounts and found buyers throughout the area. Okay. You know this guy. Here he is, 19 years, or actually a little younger than that, 18 years old, just as he's sworn in. Audie Murphy was the son of sharecroppers in Hunt County, just outside of Greenville. No money. And for a while, the family was living in an old boxcar. Again, it was toward the end of the Depression. Money was tight, particularly for sharecroppers. Dad ended up leaving Audie and the 4 kids and his wife there, never to be heard from again. His mother soon after died of tuberculosis, and Audie was left with 4 siblings that he felt responsible for caring for. He was a short little guy. He had a 22 rifle was about it, and he'd go out and he'd do what he could to shoot squirrels or anything to eat, squirrels, rabbits. In fact, he said, if I didn't hit something, I didn't eat, and the kids didn't. But it got so bad. He could pick up some jobs, but it got so bad he couldn't really stay. So he tried to join the service. He wanted, first of all, to join the paratroopers because they had the best boots, and footwear was awfully important to him at the time. He wasn't tall enough for that. He wasn't tough enough. He didn't appear tough enough for the Marines. So he joined the Army. He was underage at the time, but he joined, and that's him there early on in that picture. Here's why I included Audie Murphy. Not because he got famous in the movie business, he did later. I chose him because as much as anyone else, when that young man appeared on the cover of Life magazine in July 1944, looking like a Boy Scout who just got a merit badge, young but smiling and home. He had been awarded the U.S. Medal of Honor, the Congressional Medal of Honor. And as a matter of fact, they recognized him as the man who had received more medals than any other GI ever in the service, and that record still stands. But here's why it was important. It seems to me that mothers and brothers and sisters, fathers looked at him and thought, that's our boy in the service. And he's heroic. Maybe our guy it doesn't end up with all the medals, but he's a heroic guy, our young one, just like this one. He's good looking, and he's going to come back to us smiling. Some didn't, but they were able to remember that. And that's, he became a heroic stand-in for every youngster that was in the service at the time, ready to come home. And that's why I included Audie Murphy. One last guy, I couldn't get away without talking oil here. He looks like an oil guy, a slick oil guy. Does anybody know Glenn McCarthy? Anybody? Okay, you will before this is over. Glenn McCarthy was known as the king of the wildcatters. By this time, by roughly the early 1940s, there were plenty of independent people who were out wildcatting, looking for oil, smelling it, knowing it's there, going up to a farmhouse saying, I want to pay for a lease on mineral rights of your property, and I'll drill. No expense to you, but you get a percentage of it. And some of them tapped out, some of them hit it big. And Glenn McCarthy somehow could smell it. He was the king of the wildcatters, born to a father who worked at one of the processing plants in Beaumont, and went to Rice on the strength of a football scholarship, but really didn't have much in the way of prospects. He worked to buy and then bought a service station in Houston, where he met a society lady and didn't know she was, but he fell for her, she fell for him. Turned out that the father of this girl was the one that was supplying gasoline to his service station. He proposed to the daughter, and the father wasn't too happy until Glenn told the father, I will put your daughter in the same circumstance she's living now. It'll take me some time, it'll take me your help, but I'll do it. Father fronted him money to smell out oil, and on his third well, he finally hit it, and it was winners after that. He began to drill. They became very wealthy. He bought a four-engine Constellation aircraft that he would fly over Texas, looking for the right kind of geology. He wasn't necessarily the richest. Folks like H.L. Hunt and others that controlled production as well as exploration were. But he was a Houston boy. And he was a pretty serious drinker, as a matter of fact. That was one of his shortcomings. But he really loved his hometown. Loved Houston. And he said, you know what I want to do? I want to attract all these oil guys to Houston. They got money to spend. I'm going to build the biggest, fanciest, nicest hotel west of the Mississippi here. I'm going to call it the Shamrock. I'm Glenn McCarthy. I'm going to call it the Shamrock, and I'm going to call in. We're going to have the biggest, nicest hotel there is. So, wrong way. Glenn McCarthy, who looks a little like Errol Flynn there, built the Shamrock Hotel. Now, have any of you heard the story of Shamrock? Shamrock was the first one that had all rooms air conditioned. It had a swimming pool big enough that they could give water skiing lessons in it on the weekend. Yeah. It was a luxury hotel, and he was going to open it in luxury. He invited in 250 of his Hollywood friends to come in for the opening. He arranged for a radio hookup that could be the opening and the dance band that was going to be playing on that opening night. He had the restaurant out. He had tickets given away. It turned out, and it was a huge publicity event. I mean, there were, like I say, there were stars, Gene Tierney, Ronald Coleman. There were hundreds of stars there that he brought in on his plane and by train. But the problem is that the security wasn't all that good, and people began to break in and grab the seats that the ticket holders should have, and nobody knew the difference, and it just turned into a giant drunken melee. By this time, McCarthy was in his cups totally and couldn't help. There were people chasing Claudette Colbert down the hallway. Betty Davis, it was said, had gone out on the highway looking to hitchhike back to Hollywood. She had to get away from there. It was poor old Pat, the Irishman. Pat O'Brien was one of the speakers at the thing. Pat O'Brien was in the cups. He was pretty drunk along with McCarthy, but he had a radio mic and he was broadcasting, and it was terrible. There were fights breaking out everywhere. Well, McCarthy went on to live a life, do fairly well. He eventually, as many of them did, went bankrupt and made it back. But along the way, he ended up, there was a lady who wanted to write a book about Texas oil and came and interviewed him and had read the stories about the hotel. And so she wrote a book about the transfer of power from cattlemen or horsemen to oil people. And she had Glenn McCarthy as one of the characters. If you don't recognize the story, again, you might from Giant. At the very end of Giant is the story of the hotel opening. There's Chill Wills there, and the character of Jet Rink was modeled by Edna Ferber in her book Giant, after Glenn McCarthy. That's how Glenn McCarthy lives on in the memory now as a Jet Rink. I wish I could have gone through all the other ones there, but those people and others helped us become what we are, as in terms of loud, proud, and brash. They've given us the stories, and I've shared a few of them with you tonight, that are ones like no place else. Uh, a century later, it's still true that we're making those stories. There was a girl this summer, a little girl in Fort Worth this summer. I heard the story. 8-year-old girl. Uh, they sent to visit with her aunt, a favorite aunt up in Missouri, I think, on a farm outside of Joplin. And the aunt took the little girl out in the fields at night in that farm and showed her, and they listened to the wind and looked up at the nice crescent moon. And the aunt says, "Now, isn't that a beautiful little moon?" And the girl says, in Texas, we've got a whole moon. So we're always better here, folks. It's always better here. Um, and if you want to know about these others that I didn't talk about, I will be here afterwards. I hope you'll come by and look at the books. I've got some, they're for sale, credit card, otherwise. I want to thank the people of the Grapevine Historical Society here, because it's through history that we learn much about the present, and we learn about history through talking about it, reading it, and sharing it with one another. So thanks for giving me the opportunity to do that tonight. I'm going to ask you two favors, if you would, before I get away here. Books are sold most often now, not through exposure in bookstores, but through social media. If you have a social media account and you enjoyed yourself tonight, let your follower, let the people know. Tell them you enjoy it and you learned some new stories, and you're welcome to use all the jokes. The second thing is, people ask me from time to time, Rusty, are you a writer who speaks? Are you a speaker who writes? Is it writing or speaking, writing, which is, and it reminds me of the story of the guy who says to his friend, I'm about to get married. The guy says, "Oh, good, congratulations." Who is? Well, she's an identical twin. She has an identical twin sister. Very nice. And really, the interesting thing is, after the wedding, the twin sister is going to come live with us. That could be trouble. My friend, how are you going to tell them apart? Well, I'm not even going to try. So speaker, writer, if you happen to belong to a group of any sort, a social group, a genealogical group, any other group that brings in speakers, please take one of my cards off the back and pass that to the program director. I'd certainly appreciate it. Thank you, and have a good evening.